In the last several weeks, we've been examining through the Word the book of 1 Corinthians. Paul is, of course, speaking to a young church. Most theologians believe that that church was less than 100 people sitting in the city when Paul wrote that incredible letter. And as he's writing the letter, he's not just writing to a people, but he's writing to a people group that are living within the context of this metropolitan area of Corinth. Corinth was kind of a cornerstone to commerce for the Roman Empire because it was located at one of the most valuable trade routes. So for the most part, we see a collection of people that was kind of unmatched in the world. At that point, they're somewhere in the range, most historians believe, somewhere in the range of over 200,000 freedmen in this city. Now, that's freedmen. So if you count freedmen and their families and slaves, because that was a huge part of the slave market at that time, some estimate somewhere in the range of close to 500,000 people congregated in the general area around Corinth. How does 60 to 100 people, how do they do this thing called the church? How does that church impact this incredible city when there's such a small collection of people? What does a church even look like? At this point, it's not like they had, all these books. They could have just jumped online and figured out the 5 ways to plant a church. It's such a new thing that Paul spends a moment in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 talking about what this thing called the church should look like. Now, if you're going to build anything, you need a really good set of blueprints. Any architects in the room, engineers, anybody working in the trade of building at all, so you know exactly what this looks like? Anybody? No, nobody. Okay, one person. No, there's 2 of y'all. Awesome. This is what we call blueprints. If you've ever built anything, you understand that what this blueprint contains is a set of instructions that are critical to building a building. And what's fascinating about blueprints, because maybe if you've never opened one of these, you didn't know, but each one of these pages is dedicated to a specific task or trade. So tradesmen know, hey, listen, if I'm a drywall guy, I got to go to the page that includes instructions for drywalling. If I'm an electrician, I have to go to that page that includes information about where I'm supposed to run these electric lines. That the aspect of a blueprint is critical to the build because as each person does the thing that they're assigned to do, eventually the building is constructed. Paul begins to lay out a blueprint of what I believe the church was supposed to look like. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 10, he begins by saying, because of God's grace to me, I have laid the foundation like an expert builder. Now, others are building on it, but whoever is building on this foundation must be very careful, for no one can lay any other foundation than the one we have already have in Jesus Christ. So if you're taking notes with me this morning, what we'll begin is this simple thought that, again, as a church, number one, we are being built. We are being built. And Paul starts, of course, with this conversation around foundations. And foundations are absolutely critical for any type of build. Here's why. Number one, foundations create a sense of structural stability. The foundation provides stability for the building by distributing weight properly across the building. Number 2, load distribution. A well-designed foundation evenly distributes the load of the building, preventing unequal settling, cracking in the foundation, and eventually, if not careful, that unequal load will eventually result in an ultimate failure of the structure. Number 3, prevention of ground movement. A strong foundation anchors the building to the ground in such a way that it reduces the risk of damage from ground movement. If you study this just for a moment, to see the incredible ingenuity that's going into engineering some of these massive buildings that are built in earthquake zones is fascinating. And all because their attempt is to build a type of building and foundation that prevents the building from shaking when the whole world's shaking. Number 4, waterproofing and moisture control. Foundations are critical to this. With waterproofing and moisture control, it protects the building from ultimate rust that would set its way into all that the building is built on. Longevity of the structure. A strong foundation is essential to long-term durability of a building. We live in an old house. Our house was built in 1895. So I remember when we were doing the inspection of the house, I was a little taken back because the floors were a little wavy. Anybody live in an old house? Know what I'm talking about? Like it's called character. It's, my house has got a lot of character. And I remember being a little concerned and took an engineer into the basement so we can look at the foundation. And he said, honestly, John, I don't really need to look at the foundation all that much. And I said, why? He's like, because it's been here for 100 years. It'll be here for 100 more. The foundation created the type of structure that it was able to maintain the type of structure that created a sense of longevity. A strong foundation also supports that building's future modifications. If a foundation is laid properly, it supports any of the necessary expansion of that building. Number 7, a strong foundation creates safety. Because ultimately, the foundation is what plays a critical role in that safety of the building's occupancy. Because if that building fails and the foundation is not able to hold its weight, everyone in the building is susceptible to danger. Look, the application of this is so obvious. When it comes to Jesus as a foundation, the structure is stable. Jesus says the foundation allows the church to evenly distribute the weight. I love this because we can feed the hungry, clothe the naked, help the hurting, but without Jesus as the foundation, the church cannot maintain the weight. But when he is the foundation, the church can maintain the weight of feeding the hungry, helping those who are hurting and broken, and clothing the naked. Load distribution, right? Jesus says the foundation allows us as the church to share the weight of life. Galatians 6:2, carry each other's burdens in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. Number 3, preventing ground movement. When the ground shakes, when we are anchored, the church is anchored to Jesus, he will not be moved. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 28. Therefore, since we've received the kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptantly with reverence and awe. This is my favorite. A strong foundation of Jesus, it allows for waterproofing and moisture control. Here's why. When Jesus is the foundation, we're protected from those things that look to rot us from the inside out. When he's a strong foundation, he allows us. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3. But the Lord is faithful. He will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one. When he's the foundation, there is longevity in the structure. When he is not shaken, the world cannot shake him. Listen, we have lived through craziness. We have lived through pandemics. We have lived through cultural disaster, what it seems like. I wake up every morning to news alerts that would shake most people. But a church founded on Jesus is not shaken because he is not moved. He is not moved. He is not surprised. He is not caught off guard. He is not unprepared. He is the God who is stable. Yes. He supports future modifications. Listen, this is what we struggle with as a church collectively. But the truth is, he is a strong foundation that has not only seen the church change over generations, he has had his hand in moving and shaping the church as it has expanded from churches like Corinth with 60 people to here in 2024 where billions of people call themselves children of God that are meeting all around the world. And I know that for some reason we have this hardened sense of what church is in the Western world, and it's gonna look like this, but I just need you to know the world all over the place, all in different countries, all over the world, church looks different, but there's this gathering of people united on the foundation of Jesus, and that expansion and change doesn't shake him. He's not caught off guard. That's the brilliance of the God that we serve. He is always ready for more. Number 7, ultimately, safety. When the foundation is Jesus, we are safe. A passage that you might have memorized as a kid, Psalms chapter 18:2. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. The psalmist reminding us that there is safety in Jesus. I just want to make sure that I'm clear. It doesn't mean that everything is always comfortable. It doesn't mean that there's not times where faith drives us to make scary decisions. But ultimately, because he is our rock, I love this passage. To be absent from the body is to be in the presence of the Father. Oh, death, where is your sting? That even in death, we have this sense of safety. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 20. Together, we are his house, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. And this cornerstone is Jesus Christ himself. So here, speaking to the church of Ephesus, Paul gives us a little bit more clarity to what this actual foundation looks like. He starts by saying the cornerstone of that foundation is Jesus. Now, if you've never built a house, maybe you've never studied the building of a house, you might not know what a cornerstone is, but traditionally, a cornerstone is laid first. It sets the level for the whole building. The size of that cornerstone, the position of that cornerstone sets the direction for the whole build. So what this passage is communicating is Paul saying, when we come to this foundation, the foundation is laid first on the cornerstone of Jesus. And then the rest of the foundation is laid out by the teaching of the apostles. Now, I just want to make sure that I add some clarity. I am a believer in the Bible. I'm a believer in the authoritative scripture, like amen. And you can, I got my card-carrying Bible card. I promise you, I am all in. But remember, when Paul is writing this, there is not a collection of bound letters called the Bible. So what Paul is referring to was the teachings of the apostles, which eventually we would bind and put together as the Bible. But ultimately, I think there's a little bit of a sense of confusion, so I want to be clear. What they're teaching about is Jesus. So not only is the cornerstone Jesus, but the rest of the foundation is laid out on the teachings of who Jesus is. That's why Paul is adamant in so many of these passages to make sure he reminds the church that it's not about Apollos, it's not about Peter, it's not about Paul, it's about Jesus and only Jesus. So here's a couple things of what the foundation is not. The foundation is not about your preferences, sorry. That's right. The foundation is not about your opinions. The foundation is not about your political ideology. Right. The foundation is not about your traditions. Right. The foundation is not about your popular opinion. Yeah. The foundation is not based on your preferences or interpretations. The foundation is Jesus and only Jesus. Churches built on anything else will waver when the world shakes. Yes. But a church built on the strong foundation of Jesus is critical. We are not moved. And yet, this is just the first step of the build. Here's the second step. We are also building. Not only are we being built, but we are also building. Watch this, verse 12. He says, anyone who builds on the foundation may use a variety of materials. Gold, silver, jewels, wood, hay, or straw. But on the judgment day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, that builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burnt up, the builder will suffer great loss. I want to make sure I'm clear here, because the passage goes on to say, the builder will be saved. Why is that so critical? Because as we talk about how to build a church and the building of the church, we're going to start talking about what our efforts are in the work of our hands. Your salvation is not a product of the work of your hands. Your salvation is safe the day that you decide to step on the firm foundation of who Jesus is. But Paul wants you to know your work matters. And there's a moment that's coming where the builder will be safe, but like someone barely escaping through the wall of flame. The foundation is laid, But it's us, it's you and I who build the walls of a church. So here's Paul's two warnings. Number one, Paul's first warning, be careful with what you build with. Remember that what you're building is eternal. So he's asking you to build with eternal products. See, I don't know much about building, but I have built a tree house for my boys in the backyard. And, yeah, it's funny because you probably know things a little wonky because I built it. But I bought a tree a bit. We built a tree house. Me and my dad and my brother came out there a couple times, and we dropped anchors and a bunch of stuff. But I'm just going to tell you that tree house is probably not going to survive at the same rate as the house has survived. In 100 years from now, I'm pretty sure that treehouse is not going to be around. The house might be. The difference is that builder understood and used materials that I didn't understand and I didn't build with. He's quick here to say, listen, if we're going to build, we build with eternal resources. So here's a couple things that are eternal just to help you out. Number one, unbeknownst to popular opinion, people are actually eternal. I know all of us will one day die, but also all of us will one day face judgment. The soul of every person is eternal. So just for the sake of conversation, if what you're building leaves a trail of hurt people, you're probably building with the wrong things. If in 20 years from now, what they say about Hope Church is, man, there's just a trail of a bunch of hurt people, we probably built with the wrong things. If people are eternal, that means that we need to be mindful that as we build this thing together, that people are a priority. Yeah, that's right. Here's another thing that's eternal. Biblical truth is eternal. This is the teaching of the apostles that laid the foundation. That biblical truth is critical. So if what you're building doesn't sit well in the whole counsel of Scripture, you're probably building with the wrong things. I know it seems silly, but in 2024, unfortunately, we can build a church on temporary things. The music can be nice. The lights can be good. Everything from the stage could sound right and tickle an ear, but if not built off eternal things, then in essence, all that effort is worthless. But a church that builds with eternal things, that situates itself on the truth of God's word, that puts people in the middle of it all, that type of church, the gates of hell are afraid of. Yes. We build things that last. Number two, the second thing that Paul warned you about is not just to be careful what you build with, but also your build will be tested. Yes. Your build will be tested. He uses a phrase here that maybe somebody used when disciplining you when you were young, on the day of judgment. And that idea of fire, Paul in this passage is communicating that whatever is not eternal will burn away. I'm fascinated by this picture. Here's a picture, if you remember the fires that were in Maui recently. This house they called the Miracle House. And it's remarkable because if you notice the amount of devastation in every house around it, this house stood, and it seems almost unscathed. And I know that the phrase that they've been using is a miracle house, but what you do, you study, what you figure out is the house was just built different. See, that roof is corrugated metal. And the engineer decided to put some air pockets that would allow for wind to blow through, but it would prevent for fires to catch a hold. Around the house, they removed any shrubbery, and they placed these rocks and stones right underneath ground level around the drip line of that house. They took anything that was flammable and put it on the outside of the building. So I'm not saying that there might have been some miraculous hand in some of it, but the difference is what some count as a miracle, the house was just built different. I think sometimes what we're expecting is within the context of the church community, we want to talk about miraculous revival. I love revival. I love miracles. Hear me. I'm all about it. But the bottom line is there's a way by which we can be built different. That when the world shakes and the fires rage, what stands is what's been built on these eternal things. that we're built different. Other organizations and gatherings fail and fall. Unfortunately, other communities come together and they're susceptible to the winds of change and the movement of culture. But when the materials are eternal, fire will not consume because we have been built different. Number 3, we have also been built together. Verse 16 of this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 says this, don't you realize that all of you together are the temple of God and that the Spirit of God lives in you? If you have your Bibles, in your paper Bibles, or even if they're digital, I want you to highlight that word temple. In the original language, that word temple has a different meaning. But before we get there, I want you to see that the walls that are built on this foundation are flesh and blood. That we together are the temple. Again, the blueprints are critical because each stage of the build has a different page. Blueprints are critical because not only does it give me instructions for my specific nuance, like here, I'm reading what needs to happen at the temporary rock check dam. I don't even know what that is, a temporary rock check dam. I didn't cuss. It's just literally what I happen to make sure you take a picture that the word dam's on this. This is that retention pond that's out here. And if I flip a little bit more, I'm seeing different plans for different parts of the building that ultimately, when we get to the last page, what we find from good blueprints is not only instructions, but time frame, pace. That in a build, there are sequences that are necessary. You know, it's funny because the first several pages of this is foundation build. I am not lost. It is not lost on me that so many of you sacrificed in the process of building this actual building. You've been here at Hope Forever, and it was your faithfulness, it was your giving that allowed this church to come up from nothing. Do you remember driving by the property? Do you remember those months where you're like, are they going to actually ever do anything? Do you remember seeing workers with construction hats months on end, wondering when you're going to actually see anything come out of the ground? They were doing the work on the foundation, timing, temple, direction, schedule. You don't want to do the electric after the drywall. You want to make sure that the electric gets done before the drywall. Otherwise, you have to do the drywall all over again. Direction, timing. We are built together. If the electrician comes and says, oh man, this plan for the drainage looks really cool, I'm going to work on the drainage instead of the electric, the building now is off schedule. And probably want to check your drainage because that guy has no idea. If the drywall guy comes in and says, oh, this building looks incredible, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to save the drywall for somebody else. I'm going to work on all these beautiful lights. Your lights are going to be all over the place, and there's going to be no drywall on the house. See, when we're building together, it's not that we're building the same, it's that we're building together. That each one of us have unique giftings and callings that the Lord has placed on us. And some of you in this room have an apostolic gifting. Some of you have a prophetic gifting. Some of you have the gift of the evangelist or the shepherd or the teacher. That there's these incredible gifts that God has placed in you. And then the circle of influence. Some of you have circles of influences. You walk into rooms I'll never walk into. Mel has walked into rooms that I will never walk into. She is talking to people I will never talk to. And if I was the type of person who's like, Mel, I'm glad you're in those rooms. You need to get me in that room. Then what ends up happening is what I'm called to do doesn't get done, and what she's called to do doesn't get done, and ultimately no one's doing what they're called to do. But a church that works together, not on the same thing, knowing our individual giftings, it's the beauty of a church that's living and breathing and moving. We are built together. But back to that word temple. There's several times in Scripture where that word temple is used, but specifically Paul uses a variation of that word. The original language he uses is naos, N-A-O-S. The reason that's so important is because he's not talking about the whole of the temple. He's talking about the inner place where the Spirit of God dwells. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 20. Together we are his house, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. The cornerstone is Jesus himself. We are carefully joined together in him, becoming a holy temple for the Lord. There's that word again, naos. It is why the church is so critical. Why I believe the church is the hope of the world. It's not because of who we are, it's because who we house. That we become the dwelling place of the living God. That each and every one of us become walking, talking examples, reference points, ultimately housing the physical, the spiritual manifestation of God in each and every one of us. In the Old Testament, what we see in the inner sanctuary in this temple is where they placed the Ark of the Covenant. And if you go back to the Old Testament and watch the path and the history of the Ark of the Covenant, when there was an uncrossable sea, send the Ark of the Covenant first. That the presence of God would go before the Israelites, and what seemed like was uncrossable became crossable. When there were walls that were way too tall in a city that was fortified, what you need to do is bring the ark around that wall. Why? Because where the ark went, where the presence of God went, what was impossible became possible. Listen, when the army was unbeatable, when it seemed like the Philistines were too great, or all of the ites, the Hittites, Perizzites, all the ites, when any of them seemed too great and the army seemed unbeatable, someone go get the ark. It was the representation of the Spirit of God, the power of God here made manifest on earth. Listen, the church was never constructed to be weak. That when something seems unbeatable in culture, somebody summon the church, that dwelling place of the Spirit of God, that what seems impossible becomes possible. John, I don't know, man. There's a lot of hungry people in our city. I know it might seem impossible to others, but watch the temple of God, the church, come together and do what other people consider to be impossible, John. I mean, there is a pandemic of young girls being trafficked in our city. Watch what happens when the Spirit of God steps into what other people see no solution to and find impossible. Watch a church filled with the Spirit of God step into places that people say you have no business there, and yet the power of God shows up and city walls fall and uncrossable seas are crossed and armies are dropped down because of the faithfulness of the God that we represent. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 20 says it like this. So we are Christ's ambassadors, you and I. God is making his appeal known through us. If the band, this is a little early, if the band can make their way forward, but I've always loved this passage because I remember what it was like to go on a first date. It was 25 plus years ago because we're celebrating 25-year anniversary this week. That's right. Along with Paul and his wife, who are also celebrating their anniversary, happy anniversary. And then someone else I talked to has an anniversary this week. Everybody got married this month. That's amazing. But do you remember the first date anxieties? Going to the closet, you're trying to figure out, what am I going to put on? I got to find something flattering. I'm not putting on that thing that shows my gut. I'm not putting on that thing that shows my wimpy arms. If I have ugly calves, I want to make sure I cover my ugly calves. If I have nice calves, I'm wearing shorts so they can see the calves. Pow! You know what I'm saying? We're looking for something that makes us look appealing. What I read in this passage that messes me up is he says that we are Christ's ambassadors, so God is making his appeal known through us. That when the Spirit of God is looking to make himself appealing to the world, that I don't know why, but he chooses you and I. It goes on to say this. We speak for Christ when we plead, come back to God. This is a complex passage that I think requires more time than I have right now to break it down. But notice, it really does give the language for the church. The only thing that we should be screaming is come back to God. I know your lifestyle is not where we find comfortable, but that's okay. Come back to God. I know there's some issues politically that we might not see eye to eye on, but that's okay. Come back to God. John, what's your answer to the current cultural confusion? Just come back to God. That come back to God, that there's change here, that he works on the whole of man, that once we're set on that foundation, the teaching of the apostles, the beauty of the God that we serve is he makes all the change that's necessary. But the word to the church is come back to God. That when he puts us on, that the appeal to the world is made known. For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be offered for our sin so that we could be made right with Christ. I think this is critical. Several years ago, my wife and I were house shopping before we bought the 100-year-old house. We were looking at a house that was super cool. It had every one of our prerequisites. You walked in and it looked like a Brady Bunch house. My wife's into mid-century modern. So like I walked in, I was like, Marsha, this looks exactly like the Brady Bunch house. It had like one of those fireplaces that you can see through. Like it looked like it fit the bill. It was the right price range, which was crazy to me because even back then, real estate was nuts. Not only did it was the right look, it had the right price. It was in the right location. The schools were exactly what we wanted. The neighborhood had a beautiful little cul-de-sac. When we pulled up, there was a little bike gang running down the street. It had a white little picket fence. You saw the dogs in the neighborhood chapping. It was perfect. It was out of a movie. Right place, right price, right location. It had the right look. And I remember walking in, and there was a couple things we needed to change. Like, I don't know why they put an electric light in the middle of the shower that was hanging down. That seemed dangerous. But, what do I know? Just pop that thing back up with super glue. It should be good. We went back to our real estate agent. We're like, this is the one. I don't want to see anyone else. This is the house. He's like, well, we got to get it inspected first. Why? This is what we want. He's like, yeah, we probably should get an inspection. Okay. So the second day I went back with the inspector. And it's funny because I walked him through the house and I'm showing him why this is the perfect house. But the inspector was looking for things that I'm not looking for. That's another sermon for another day. But he's walking in, he's looking for things I'm not looking for. He didn't care about the beautiful little brick fireplace. That wasn't his concerns. He was listening for like leaks in the faucets. It was really strange. But the weirdest part was he's like, all right, I just need to walk around the house. And he's like, John, I need you to come to the back with me. Now the house was multi-level. The front of the house it was on a hill, so the front of the house didn't expose the second level, but the back of the house you could. The foundation you could see in the back, but not in the front. And when we went to the back, he showed me, he's like, you see that little crack? I was like, yeah, it's like a hairline. You could barely see it. I was like, yeah. He's like, follow with me. And we're walking around the house. And we took a right behind the house, and there's a little wooded area. He's like, you seeing it? You seeing it? And as soon as he turned, he saw that it started to flake up a little bit more. And there was more cracks and more cracks. And when you looked on the ground, it was fresh, like it had just happened. Like there was still cracks on the ground. I'm like, that's crazy. What? He's like, yeah, I wouldn't touch this house. I was like, why? The foundation isn't right. I was like, oh, okay. So maybe a dog scratched it or something. No, you just throw some cement glue on that. He's like, no, let's go in the house at this corner on the inside. And we did. We went into the basement at that corner. They had some drywall set up. He was like, watch this. And he took his heel and he pressed it up against that drywall. And not only water came out of that wall, but black stuff started coming out the wall. He said, I wouldn't touch this house with a 10-foot pole. I was like, but this is the dream house. It was the right price, the right location. It had all the right marks. It had all the right neighborhoods. It had all the right aesthetics, but it was the wrong foundation. Look, hear me. This is a simple illustration because some of you, if I push against the drywall of your life, what comes out is rotten. You're not fooling anybody. I know you got your Sunday dress on, but the truth is, if we push a little, there's some things that might come up. There's some anger, some language, there's some anxieties, there's some doubt, there's some depression that when you push long enough, what's starting to come out the walls is death. And here's the beautiful part about the God that we serve. He is in the reconstruction business. He takes what old and he makes it new. But the question is, are you willing to settle on the foundation of Jesus?